And we are live. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. For a second I didn't have the sound, like, oh shit, everything is broken. Welcome, thanks for the resub, Nipalup. I will do your question in a second. For sure, yeah. Although now he doesn't wear the sunglasses anymore, so we live in a different world now. We had like a Macron peaked internationally like for a few days, and now the sunglasses are gone, and yeah, that's that's the end of the peak. I mean, who knows? Maybe it will pull off another moment equal to the sunglasses, but yeah, I think we can say he peaked. He picked with the sunglasses, and now it's gone. It's done. I mean, I'm sure the full show will stay as a meme, but yeah. All right. So before we go, let's do the question. Oh, first, hello everyone. Also on Twitter. Hello Twitter. If you want to come to participate in the chat, you have a link to go on Twitter, on Twitch, to participate in the chat, so click there. Let me put the question for Nipalu, because you get a question up. I just updated my my database because it's February, so I added 10 more questions. So we are doing question 129. Let me open my file up. I will launch a poll if it wants to start. Nouveau sondage. Okay, we said 129. So what do we have as a question 129? Why is my file gone? Ah, okay. It's just lagging for some reason. Oh, bear with me. 129. What do we have? It's going to be a question about Hungary. So, it's going to be a simple one to do the poll. I will put that it's a true or false question, so it's going to be fairly easy. So I will read you first the question and then launch the poll, and you can participate for a minute. Again, we did Hungary last time as well? Did we do a Hungarian question? Then it's a question about Hungary. Andros, don't cheat. I don't know if we did a question about Hungary. Or maybe I forgot already. Anyway, so the question is true. True or false? Hungary has 3 national days. Is it true or false that Hungary has three national days? You have a bit more than a minute to vote. Wait, it's always you three, yeah. So Andros, don't cheat. Don't tell people the correct answer. For the others, you can vote, and then I will tell you the little story about whether or not Hungary has 3 or more or less national days. And I better have my facts right, because Andros is there. I mean, worst case scenario, he can correct me and scream fake news. He's lying to us. Okay, for now, chat is split. I will let you vote for another 15 seconds. Hungary is the weird kid in the classroom. Maybe he's the teacher that is obsessed with. I'm not obsessed with that, just keep an eye on it. Because I know he's a troublemaker. Alright, final seconds. Okay, so most of you voted that it's true that Hungary has 3 national days, and that's indeed the case. Hungary has 3 national days, so I speak under the control of Andros. So the first Hungarian National Day takes place on the 15th of March in memory of the 1849 Revolution and War of Independence. Next, you have the second day on the 20th of August, where Hungarians commemorate the country's founding and the founder, King Saint Stephen. And finally, the 23rd of October, which is the most recent revolution and War of Independence of 1956. You'd say only 2? Yeah, okay, we'll have to double check. Okay, let's see. National Day, because I'm pretty sure I did. Okay, so National Day, Hungary. Public holidays. Okay, wait, that doesn't solve it. A number of national day. Because I did make double checking. I did find 3. So let's see if I need to correct live. Google tells me that there's 3 national days. So do they like? Yeah. Like I find like several like websites that say that it's 3 national days. Yeah, I don't think it's public holidays because then public holidays like there would be many more. But I mean, in Hungary, like, does it? What's the status of the 23rd of October? Like, is it? No, it's a public holiday, but is it considered like national day or just remembrance? Matteo's perspective. Yeah, well, I'll go check on the on an official website of Hungary to see what's the exact status. I mean, I found 3. I see websites still saying 3, but okay, I'll double check that one. All right, up. Things to double check. All right, where was I before we got into? Yes, I was doing my introduction. So I hope you were doing well. You had a nice beginning of the week. Welcome back for another news review. Today on the menu, we are going to talk about the UK and the EU, of course, trying to reset their relation 10 years after Brexit. It's going to be 10 years since Brexit. The Brexit referendum, like, yeah, that's. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. But yeah, as we approach the 10-year anniversary, the UK say, yeah, maybe we should reset. So we'll read a few articles about that. We'll read a couple of articles about institutions or within the institutions, your institution trying to do their bit of internal therapy, whether it is the Commission going on a retreat with von der Leyen trying to avoid or limit the risk of rebellion within our own Commission, or also the socialists who are trying to accept the new situation in the Parliament. Although it's a slightly older article, but it's a context article in English, so for once I figured that we would read a context article in English. And to finish, an article about how the EU is starting, slowly, to move on its dependencies towards the US and trying to become more independent, which is the new slogan for the past few months, the past year rather. As you don't want to lose, you'll say it's for your nationalities. That's a safe bet. So those are the topic of the day. As usual, if there are other things you want to discuss, well, you have 10 fingers, at least those on Twitch. You have 10 fingers, you have a keyboard, you have a chat, and so you write and you let me know, and we discuss. And without further ado, oh shit, I know what I forgot to do, but that doesn't matter. Without further ado, let's dive into it. So let's talk about the UK with 10 years after the Brexit referendum, encouraging better relations, closer relations to the EU. Of course, the current context of the war in Ukraine and Trump, all the Trump drama makes it interesting for the UK to try to get a bit closer to what is still a close ally in the EU. So let's read about this. So the EU and UK to ramp up talks on closer ties 10 years after the Brexit referendum. Like, it's funny, that's why I feel bad about the 10 years since the Brexit referendum, because I still, back then I was in the parliament, I still remember all the discussions, all the debate we had back then in the parliament and everything. Like, my friends, many of my friends were Brits. And I remember having discussion with them, long discussions with them about it, and trolling them about it at Plugs and everything. it was funny also because like the day after Brexit, there was a lot of kind of Schadenfreude in France, where the French were like, "Oh, good, we got rid of the Brits, and now so that means now we can do the kind of EU that we want that the Brits were not letting us do." So they're shooting themselves in the foot. Too bad for them, good for us. Now the EU can go move forward. So there was a bit of like a good old Franco-British rivalry after the vote, and I remember like seeing my British friends like on the Thursday after the vote, they were absolutely fucking livid. Like they were feeling terrible, including people who including people like the irony was that I had people. So most of my friends were my friends who were Brits were ECR, so they were working for British conservatives. Including some of, and so they were like the UK ECR delegation was kind of split half and half. There was half that was pro-Brexit, half that was against Brexit. It was very funny because I had like one of my best friends was working for a hardcore pro-Brexit MEP, but himself was absolutely against Brexit, and somehow he managed to hide that from his boss for the entirety of the mandate. Like somehow his boss was convinced that the assistant was also pro-Brexit, well actually not. And I don't know how he pulled that off, but say I never outright lied to him saying, yeah, no, I'm pro-Brexit, where I was not, but I always played a bit on the gray area. And he understood what he wanted to understood, but actually he was not at all pro-Brexit, and he was absolutely depressed after the vote, saying, oh yeah, everyone was like, oh, that's absolutely terrible. Why are we doing this? We're shooting ourselves in the foot, etc., etc. But yeah, 10 years ago, yeah, thinking that it's 10 years, like definitely makes me feel definitely older. You were in middle school at that time. Oh. I had more than enough fun with Brexit, but considering how the world is moving, I'll be happy to see them getting closer to ties with it. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing, okay? Because I mean, you know that after Brexit, so there was the negotiation, there were the infamous negotiations with the UK to prepare Brexit and prepare the relationship, and there was the famous cherry picking, where the UK thought that, oh yeah, okay, we can leave the EU, but we will keep access to the things of the part of the EU that we liked, and the EU was like, yeah, no, that's not gonna happen, mate. You leave the EU, so you leave all the EU, including the parts that you like, and if you want to have access to this, well, you have to pay, or you have to give us stuff, etc., etc. And so that fed into all drama and like all the memes around cherry picking with Donald Tusk, so currently Prime Minister of Poland, but back then he was President of the European Council, who's spending his time like trolling the Brits during the negotiation. It was amazing. Like there's this super famous, like if you are, let me find it, this picture of Tusk at a summit, and he's eating ice cream like with a pissed off face. And like I need to find the tweet. Like the tweet's basically him eating like cherry ice cream, something like the picture went viral. Tusk pissed off ice cream, like the where is it? It was 2018. Come on, load. Okay, I don't have the initial, like he made himself like a quote about it, but like the picture is famous. Okay, screw you. It's loading. Like this picture, like it's a very famous one, and he posted that himself, so he looks pissed off, eating ice cream, and he made this. He posted himself the picture. With something around cherry picking, etc., like as to troll the Brits. That was absolutely hilarious. But yeah, those were the times where cherry picking was the the word, the very fancy and trendy word in the bubble. But yeah, 10 years has passed. Many things have changed in the world, and so now the question is, should we get closer to them? With the dilemma, because on the one hand, yes, we still have like a lot of commonalities with the UK, particularly on defense. Ironically, the one thing that played a lot into the first reset of the relationship between the UK and the EU was the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine created like a topic where the Brits and the EU were fully aligned and like actively wanted to cooperate to help Ukraine and everything. So that kind of gave positive ground, all things considered, some positive ground to restart a relationship and have commonalities. And of course, the war in Ukraine is not over. We have now also the rise of the return of Donald Trump and all the trade wars that he has launched. And because of that, there is now appetite on the UK side to restore relationship to a certain extent, because Brexit is still like a sensitive topic in UK politics. And at the same time, the EU has an interest in having the Brits close, like keeping them close, having good relationship with them, etc. Because there are definitely areas where we can work together. But at the same time, you have the issue that the EU can't give too much of a good deal to the UK, because if they give too much of a good deal to the UK, then it feeds into the idea that actually you can leave the EU and just keep all the good parts and leave the parts that you don't like behind you without any consequences, which is of course not the objective of the EU. Like they say, okay, the EU is a package, you can't cherry pick, and so they have to maintain this balance. They have to maintain this balance to keep at bay all the potential, like notably far right or far left, who wants to leave the EU. Keep your friend close and your enemies close. UK is not, I would not say like an enemy, especially under Keir Starmer. Alright, let's start. So a volatile geopolitical context has spurred the European Union and the United Kingdom to deepen their collaboration on areas including defense and trade after a fraught decade. With the 10th anniversary of the referendum that took the UK out of the EU approaching, and after years of acrimonious rhetoric, a rapprochement between London and Brussels now seems well and truly underway. Talks on deeper trade, customs and defense integration are accelerating, with a steady stream of positive signals issued on both sides of the channel in recent days. Perhaps officials at both ends are taking a leaf from the 2016 nostalgia trend that has been taking social media by storm, where users embrace the simpler time of a decade ago. Is that a trend, like 2016 nostalgia? I haven't seen it. Like, I don't know. Like, is that a thing? Yeah, that's a thing. Okay, I didn't know. But like, is there a particular reason why 2016, or it's just like 10 years ago and it just happened to be 2016, or there was something 2016 or 2016 was the best? Because I absolutely, to be fair, like my social media bubble is very targeted, let's say. So maybe I missed completely that, but okay, interesting. Like 2016, like okay, we had Brexit. What else did we have that was interesting? Those were the Juncker years. So Juncker, cœur avec les doigts, quoi. Yeah, 2016. I mean, it's Brexit. Oh yeah, right. Like before the first mandate of Trump. Yeah, you're right, because like end of 2016. Like you're right, because 2016 was kind of the doom year, because we took in a row. So mid-year we have the Brexit referendum, and then in November we have Trump being elected. Like it was at the end of 2016, it was like absolute dooming in the bubble, like we're all like, oh, we're gonna die, it's terrible, it's the end of Europe and everything. And then Macron was elected, and suddenly there was a new wave of optimism. But yeah, the end of 2016 was like very brutal on the bubble, and nobody could believe Trump would be elected. I mean, myself included, like I remember, like I did not like the entire night. I did part of the election night with my British friends, and a couple of MEPs who were there, including a couple of them who were like very much pro-Trump. And like initially was like showing, say, yeah, there's no way the guy can win. Okay, he's a joke, etc. And like as the results are pouring in, I mean, yeah, that's not very good. All that, like, what the fuck is happening? Yeah, at the end of the night, we were like, yeah, no, that's kind of weird. So yeah, like, really nostalgia on 2016 because like we still have the election of Trump, where Brexit, like, I mean, in terms of like 2015, we have the migrant crisis. So from mid-year, same, like everything is going to shit. 2015 wasn't there like also the Greek crisis? At least another part of the Greek crisis. I mean, maybe like the nostalgia goggle are a bit too rosy tinted, but anyway. Where was I in all this? Yeah, with the simpler times. But more likely, it's a response to mounting pressures on the UK and on the UK's governing Labour Party, which is consistently polling several points behind the right-wing populist Reform UK, led by arch-Brexiteer Nigel Farage, as well as an increasingly hostile geopolitical environment that's upending the global order. I remember in 2016 seeing a video of a Brit begging the American to vote for Trump because he felt ashamed of Brexit and wanted the American people to hide Brexit with a bigger mistake. Yeah, that didn't age well. But yeah, the funny thing is that... So like I said, Brexit remains a polarizing topic in the UK. But the funny thing is that I think since 2018, 2019, I think all the polls in the UK, like there's not a single one that shows a majority of the Brits thinking that Brexit was a good idea. Like all the polls, like a couple of years after they voted, all the polls show in majority of the Brits saying, yeah, actually we fucked up doing that. That was not our best idea to do that. We should have stayed at the pub. And nonetheless, the guy who made Brexit happen, Nigel Farage, is now like the leader of the opposition in the UK, polling very well and everything, despite the fact that he is the face of Brexit, a Brexit that most Brits actually agree on regretting. So it's a bit of an interesting evolution, even if Farage beyond Brexit, like he's a charismatic leader. He's a persona. Like that's why like all the parties that he makes are like polling high, and the second he leaves that party, like the party collapses. Like how many parties did he do? So he did UKIP, he did the Brexit Party, and now UK Reform. Like UKIP collapsed the second he left. Brexit Party, same collapse. So now it's Reform UK, or maybe Reform UK will absorb the Tories. We'll see. But like it's very interesting to see how much like it's really the persona of Nigel Farage that makes people vote for him. Like it's anything else around him, people don't give a shit. But it's just him, which is a problem because when he's not there, everything collapses. Maybe they only see Boris Johnson as a Brexit. No. I mean, Nigel Farage is the guy that made Brexit. Like, you cannot like I would argue that in the eyes of the public, like Farage is much more like the Brexit guy than Johnson. Like Johnson negotiated the agreement, and he was also kind of the turning point for the Brexit campaign, because that's the fact that he chose to back Brexit instead of Remain that switched things. But like really, Farage is the guy that made Brexit happen, because it was like the original sin of Brexit is a promise of David Cameron, I think back in 2009, if my memory serves well, where when taking the leadership of the Tories, is under pressure of Nigel Farage and the more ultra-conservative part of the Tories, and he makes the commitment of doing a referendum on Brexit. Like he says to kind of show his credential to the growing like Eurosceptic part of the Tories. He says, yeah, okay, I'm going to do a referendum on Brexit, but before Cameron like committed to do that referendum, it was just Farage, and Farage like created pressure that was sufficient within the Tories, that Cameron then made the promise, and then Farage like took it away by campaigning and everything, and Johnson being himself like the also a turning point during the campaign, because like the famously so Boris Johnson was like very popular within the Conservative Party. Everybody knew that he wanted to become prime minister and everything. And famously, he made an opinion piece on Brexit to say which side he would back, because he was being pressured on saying who he was supporting. And he famously made two versions of that opinion piece. One way was saying he was backing Brexit, and one way was saying he was backing Remain. And it shows at the last moment which one to publish. He published the one in favor of Brexit, because he thought, okay, that's the one that will allow me to become prime minister later on. Probably didn't believe that Brexit would win. He didn't bet on it, but he thought, yeah, okay, if I back Brexit, that's going to weaken Cameron and the Conservatives sufficiently so that I can do a coup. So famously, like Johnson, like backed Brexit, but for pure career interests. Yeah, right. When Brexit happened, he said, yeah, and Farage himself like said that he was surprised to have won. He didn't expect to win until the very final days. He didn't think he would win. But yeah, basically, like after the referendum, he was very much courage fuyant, as we say in French, like quick flee. Cameron. Like that's amazing. That so Cameron is the guy who committed to do the referendum. He's the one who proposed the referendum. Like he had no obligation. He does the referendum. He loses the referendum, so that means okay, you have to negotiate the UK leaving the EU. The day after, he says, yeah, well, that was a fuck up. Well, I'm leaving. Good luck. The guy creates the mess, and then he's like, well, that's your problem now. I'm not dealing with that shit. Farage himself was like, lol, I'm not dealing with that shit as well, and so like that basically killed then the Conservatives as we saw in the years that followed. But many Brexiteers argue that they still are for Brexit, but not this one. Ah, yeah, that's a classic. Yeah, that's the classic. It's like, no, I'm not against Europe. I'm not just in favor of this one. You don't know what is the other Europe, but say, no, I'm not against Europe. I'm just not in favor of this one. which means absolutely nothing. It's a way to dodge the controversies of your own position. Wasn't Cameron also the guy who allowed the Scottish referendum? Yes, but I was smart on his part. Tactically, I was smart on his part because he did the Scottish referendum with the idea of saying, okay, well, you do the referendum, we give you a shot, and that solves the question. And he hyped up like basically say, oh yeah, but if you leave the UK, you leave the UK, so you don't get any benefits that you were getting from being part of the UK, etc. So he did quite a dooming campaign and everything, bashing on the fact like when the pro Scottish independence was saying, oh well, after we leave the UK, we'll join the EU. Cameron was like, yeah, no, you're not going to, because you're not a member by default, and then I have a veto on whether Scotland can join the EU, so we'll see. And then when Scotland lost the referendum, like I don't remember the exact score. Referendum Scottish independence. It was 2014, and the results were 55 to 45. Wait, is it the right? Yeah, that's the right one. So 55% of the Scots voted to stay in the UK, and then so that was the vote. And then after Brexit, the Scottish said, well, wait, we voted to stay in the UK under the understanding that we would still be part of the EU. So if there is Brexit, that's kind of changing the equation. So we want to leave the UK because we want to be part of the EU, and the Cameron and the Tories say, yeah, no, you had your referendum in 2014, that solved the question. So no, you're not gonna get another referendum. So yeah, but it's also like you had a big divide. Like after Brexit, like you even had like a lot of conversation about whether the UK would explode, like would get splintered, would get divided, because you had such like a separate. Let's see, referendum Brexit map. You had such like a clear geographical divide within the country, or basically it was England and Wales that voted for Brexit, and Scotland and Ireland voting very clearly to stay in the EU. Yeah, that's the one. Wait, let me up. Loading. So you look at the map, yeah, very clear division. So it's really like England. You have a part, Northern Ireland. It's divided, but yeah, Scotland very clearly votes in favor of staying in the EU. Like it's not even a contest. And so you had discussions back then. Okay, can the UK as a country survive? Like you had actual like discussion about that. And yeah, London was against it. Like basically the big cities were against Brexit, and then the countryside and everything, like the former industrial part and everything, were pro-Brexit, which is something that then Boris Johnson built on, because the industrial parts of England that voted for Brexit historically were Labour voters, and using the Brexit vote, Johnson got them to vote for the Conservative. Like that was that's basically what made Johnson successful in his bid to conquer power, was the fact that he managed to conquer and to conquer what is called the Red Wall. The Red Wall is that industrial region north of England that was like a Labour bastion, and that Johnson turned around using Brexit by saying, "Oh yeah, you voted for Brexit. I want to make Brexit happen." And the Labour, the other, they want to undo what you voted for. But wasn't that also a tactic behind the Brexit referendum? He never thought Brexit would win when he proposed it. No, of course. Of course, he made that Cameron when he proposed the Brexit referendum. He thought that he would never pass. Like, and most Brits didn't think he would pass. Like I said, when I was discussing with my friends like 10 years ago before the referendum, they were almost all of them were telling me, no, but it's fine. Yes, we're a bit pissed off and everything, but the British man is a reasonable person. They would not vote to leave the EU. We'll negotiate some kind of thing, etc. And that's it. We'll stay in. Like, nobody imagined that it would be like that. Like, it's like the official line was Labour was in favor, the Conservatives were in favor. And then it's the split within each party plus Farage rising that made Brexit. But initially, they all thought, yeah, no, it's just Cameron was like using that to feed, let's say, its own internal conservative politics, but nobody was believing it. Remember the Euro Cup of 2016 game between Northern Ireland and Wales? Some people were chanting something like, "We're not stupid, we vote Remain." Yeah, that's. I can imagine that there was some tensions between the Brits after that. But yeah. Up. Where was I in all this? Blah blah blah. Voilà. The momentum started building in 2024 when newly elected Prime Minister Keir Starmer sought a reset in the UK's trade and economic ties with the EU. He has recently signaled an eagerness for alignment with the bloc's single market in hopes of boosting the UK's ailing economy and shoring up its defense against global trading volatility. Talks of slashing checks and barriers on trade are expected to intensify after a meeting between UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves and the EU's Trade and Economy Chief Maroš Šefčovič and Valdis Dombrovskis in Downing Street on Monday. Dombrovskis told BBC that after the talks that the EU is ready to engage in negotiations on reintegrating the UK into a customs union, a notion that Starmer initially ruled out because it was toxic within the UK, but which is now under mounting pressure to reconsider from several cabinet colleagues. Brussels has always been clear that the UK cannot pick and choose privileged access to the single market without accepting the EU's full freedom. The full freedom of movement of goods, services, capital, and people. Back during the Brexit negotiation, the post-Brexit negotiations, the UK was like, oh well, yeah, I like the single market, I still want this, I still want that, and the other, but I don't want like freedom of movement, like of people, like because it was the vote was about how we don't want to be invaded by those pesky Europeans. Those pesky Polish plumbers and doctors and everything, which created issues for them because then they saw that, oh shit, actually our health system runs thanks to nurses and doctors who are not British. That might be a problem actually. Yeah, and the EU was like, yeah, no. If you want access to the market, people need to be able to come and go, and then there's a question also of you have to follow the EU rules and everything, and that was politically toxic post-Brexit, and so they said, no, we don't want. Yeah, then the issue of Northern Ireland, which was which forced, let's say, a creative solution, as we say, because the Brits were confronted to their own contradictions, because you had, at the same time, they didn't want to follow European rules, but on the other hand, that was necessary if they wanted to maintain the freedom of circulation in Northern Ireland in application to the Good Friday Agreement that basically put an end to the civil war in Northern Ireland. So there was a very creative solution that was found, where basically the UK gave up to say, okay, we are going to pretend. So let's go back on that map. So you have the UK, you have Northern Ireland. The solution was to say, okay, so this part, Northern Ireland, you're supposed to have like freedom of circulation between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. That's part of the Good Friday Agreement. So there's no border checks. So people, capital, goods can move back and forth as much as they want. That's a problem if there's supposed to be a hard border around the UK and with the EU, because you don't want to respect the European rules. So that means that goods have to be checked for customs and everything. You can't move stuff and people around, etc., etc. So in the end, the solution that they found was to say, well, we're going to say that Northern Ireland is both inside the single market and not inside the single market. In the sense that if you have products from the UK that go to Northern Ireland and that are intended just for Northern Ireland, well, then you don't have to follow European rules. You do whatever you want. But if those are goods that are intended or could end up in the EU, well, then before they arrive in Northern Ireland, at the moment where they enter Northern Ireland, there must be custom checks. There must be checks to make sure that what enters Northern Ireland respects EU rules. And basically, you're drawing a virtual border in the sea between the UK and Northern Ireland, which was pissing off like insanely the Irish Unionists, so the ones who want Northern Ireland to stay in the UK, as well as the part of the Tories and everything. But that was the only way to make it work, because otherwise, like, the only way to maintain an absolute border between all the UK and the EU would be for the UK to put an end to the Good Friday Agreement, which is something they definitely don't want to do, because that was, again, like the thing that put an end to the civil war in Northern Ireland. So they had to swallow their hat and pretend that it was a solution that was corresponding to their red line, but ultimately it was they had to bend to the European demands, because that was the only way to work that it would work. Also, the agriculture sector relied heavily on European laborers. There's even more funny than that. Fishermen. Like, British fishermen were like one of the top categories of people who were in favor of Brexit, because they saw the European fishermen, like the French fishermen, Dutch fishermen, etc. They go fish in British seas, in British waters, and so they take the fish from us, and so they were very, 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 very much in favor of Brexit. And so Brexit happens. They're super happy. Brexit happens. Oh yeah, cool. We're gonna kick out those pesky people outside of the British seas. Except that in the end, two things happened. First, as part of the post-Brexit deal, like fisheries was like one of the last issues to be negotiated, because it was politically so sensitive on both sides. And in the end, the solution was say, okay, the UK will regain control of its waters, after a number of years. So they had to guarantee access to British waters for to European fishermen for a number of years. I forget right now what was the number of years. I don't remember if it was 10, 15 years or more. But yeah, to maintain access to those seas to the British water for a time, that pissed off royally the fishermen. And then they had the Kiskul effect because they said, great, now we have the fish and it's our fish. Except that they failed to realize something. 70% of everything British fishermen fish, bring back to the shores, are actually sent to the EU. So they're fishing to export to the EU. But since Brexit means there's hard borders between the UK and the EU, that impacted very, very heavily the exports of the UK, the fish exports of the UK. And so fishermen were like, oh, but that's not what I wanted, actually. Like, I killed my own market. And so you had actual campaigns in the UK, public campaigns going around the lines of, support your fishermen, buy British fish. Like, they wanted British people to buy a shit ton of fish because they couldn't anymore, send it easily to Europe because of their own decision. Like, that's always the same things, and the most people who are calling for radical solutions then are the first ones to be shocked and reluctant to deal with the consequences of their own radicality. I saw a documentary some time ago about yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. But yeah, I always found it very funny. The fishermen were like, wait, so we just kill our own market? Huh. I didn't see that coming. Extremely funny. Those were the years where every week we were like, hey, Shadowfrinder, look at yourself shooting yourself in the foot. And oddly enough, post-Brexit, many of the parties that were advocating for their country leaving the EU, they got very quiet all of a sudden. Like, suddenly, leaving the EU? I never heard of that. No, we don't want that. What? Frexit? I don't know that word. Never heard of it. And also within the EU, like, Brexit was probably the best communication campaign for the EU that ever happened. Because suddenly, everyone in the EU suddenly realized, hey, so actually there's tons of useful stuff that's happening thanks to the EU, so that's actually kind of a dumb fucking idea to leave the EU. Is the young British generation very keen to try to come back in the EU, or will they accommodate Brexit? I mean, the young generation was pissed off about Brexit. They were pissed off. Like, I haven't seen the latest polls, but I'm fairly certain that all the polls show like the younger people are, the more in favor of going back in the EU they are. The thing is that it's whether it's politically feasible or not. Personally, I think that at some point it's likely that the UK will come back in the EU. But it's gonna take some time. Like, there's gonna be a generation before that's even politically feasible to have the discussion inside the UK. So I would say, like, maybe in 15 years, you may have like political debates about in the UK on whether rejoining the EU. And then even, let's say that they reapply, they have to go back again through the hoops of joining the EU. And you can be sure that some countries will be like, yeah, So you remember all the things that you had, the opt-outs, the rebates that you had back when you were in the EU? Well, that's not gonna happen. So yeah, who knows? Who knows? Worst part is that many didn't learn the lesson and are now sure the problem is not Brexit, but that Europe hates them and wants to destroy. That's the classic. You're coping. You're coping hard. Even with the right of far right protest, I still feel like we would have to look. You would have to look to the latest polls, but I think like as far as I remember, like the polls are showing that young people tend to be in favor of, or at least like being against Brexit, or potentially even in favor of rejoining. But yeah, then it's a question of letting time pass, and then build a political consensus within the UK, and then well, does the EU want the UK back, and at what conditions? I mean, to be fair, if the UK wants to join back, the issue is not gonna be technical. Like, since they were part of the EU for like 40 years, the UK is largely aligned even today to the EU, so you still have to do adjustment and everything, but nothing that would be daunting. Like the problem would be political, because the UK would want the rebates, they would want the opt-out and everything, and would the member state accept that? And would they trust the UK? Because they will not be like, okay, yeah, you can come back, but I don't want like. Then 20 years later, you go back to the good old habit and say, oh, it's all the fault of the EU, and so let's leave again. Member state will be like, yeah, you're in or you're out. So yeah, we'll see. Where was I? So yeah, the full freedom that we discussed. So, and full reintegration into the bloc single market remains politically sensitive for Starmer, as accepting the free movement of people across EU-UK border would feed into Reforms UK anti-immigration platform. Alright. The EU is reportedly negotiating a Farage clause to be included in a future EU-UK pact, which would allow the bloc to be adequately compensated should Reform UK come to power and pull out of the Labour negotiated deal. See the level of trust. Like, yeah, we're not going to waste time and energy if you're going to then abandon the deal the second Farage comes into power. While a general election in the UK may not be held until the summer of 2029, Reform UK is currently topping the polls. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez told the New Statesman earlier this week that he supported the UK rejoining the EU, saying there's a clear need to have the UK on board again. A deal struck between the Sanchez government and the UK last June on Gibraltar, the overseas British territory that has been left in limbo after the 2020 Brexit deal, cleared a major hurdle to a broader EU-UK arrangement. The agreement thawed long-running tensions between Madrid and London and provided free rein for Brussels officials to take the lead on negotiating a broader reset in post-Brexit ties with the UK. Gibraltar, which is the island next to Spain, which relied on free access, again, that they lost after Brexit, and so they had to negotiate a special deal that would make Spain happy about it, and so that took many years. Okay. On Tuesday, European Parliament President Roberta Metsola called for renewed momentum in those negotiations in a speech before the Spanish Senate in Madrid. 10 years on from Brexit, it's been 10 years, and in a world that has changed so profoundly, Europe and the UK need a new way of working together on trade, customs, research, mobility, and on security and defense. This is about looking forward and doing what makes sense for Europe and for the UK, today the Maltese politician said. Malta historically having links to strong links with the UK, and they used to be a British colony. It's time to exercise the ghosts of the past, reset our partnership, and find solutions together. That's realistic pragmatism anchored in values that will see us all move forward together. I'm curious to see what the French would say. Brussels and London are also hoping that they will find a compromise to deepen defense cooperation and ensure Ukraine can buy the military equipment it needs using the EU's recently agreed 90 billion euro loan, two-thirds of which is earmarked for military assistance, including British-made systems. Defense and security is historically something that the UK, even back during the initial negotiations on Brexit, security and defense was always a topic where both sides knew they were going to work together. Like they said, okay, there's Brexit, but we have common security interests, etc. So, even back then, say, yeah, we'll sort out things on defense and security. There is political will on both sides, so that was always seen as something where there would be work to be done together. And then the war in Ukraine arrived, which increased even further, and now post-Trump and everything, that's at an all-time high, especially since the Brits, in the case of Ukraine, have been amongst the biggest supporters to Ukraine ever since the beginning. They were part of the hardliners in support of Ukraine, and they also want now a piece of the money that is being deployed for Ukraine to buy weapons. There's a whole debate on the buy European clauses, meaning that EU money should be given to Ukraine should be used to buy European weapons. And so you have a fight between France, Poland, Germany on that. We'll rediscuss that, I'm sure, in the rest of the articles. Especially since the UK is an important defense partner and also purveyor of weapons for Ukraine. So you're trying to work out, okay, even if the money is supposed to be used first and foremost for European companies, could you still use part of it to buy British weapons or weapons from partners that Ukraine would need? Talks between the two sides to allow the UK's full participation in the EU's 150 billion loan for defense scheme, SAFE, collapsed last November when they failed to find a compromise over how much London would have to contribute financially. So SAFE is another part of the recent defense push of the EU, where basically the Commission is borrowing on the market 150 billion euro that they put on the table, and that then member states can individually claim to finance defense efforts. The idea being that this money can only be used to buy stuff from Europe or from countries that have security partnerships with the EU. So there's a few countries that have a security partnership with the EU. The UK wasn't part of it. The US definitely not. And so they wanted to have access to be eligible to SAFE. And so the Europeans were like, okay, you want to be part of SAFE? Fine. Then you have to pay part of the bill. Of course, we're not going to pay from our pockets something that then you reap the benefits. So you want access to SAFE? Fine. You have to pay X billion to contribute to the pot. And the UK say, yeah, no, we were ready to pay a few millions, but certainly not billions, and so the talks collapsed. Now, whether there will be pressure to restart the discussion, wait and see. I will discuss Charles Michel's proposition for EU Security Council on Twitch. The Security Council was it Michel or was it Costa? No, not Costa. Kubilius. I think originally that's the Security Council is the idea of Kubilius. or maybe Charles Michel commented on it afterwards, in which case I haven't seen it yet. But originally, I think that's Kubilius who talked about the EU Security Council. Well, the European Security Council, rather. It's not just EU because they also want to put the UK in there. Anyway. Where was I? Euronews understands that those talks fell apart over a major gap between the two sides, whereas the final offer on the table from the EU was around 2 billion euro. The UK estimated it ought to contribute just over 100 million euros. So quite a big gap. Starmer told reporters of the weekend during a visit to China that the EU and UK should work more closely together when it comes to defense. Whether it's safe or other initiative, it makes good sense for Europe in the widest sense of the word, which is the EU plus other European countries, so basically means the UK, Norway, to work more closely together, he said. That's what I've been advocating, and I hope to make some progress on that. EU officials are currently wrestling with how to involve third countries, including the UK, in the bloc's shared 90 billion euro loan for Ukraine. So again, okay, I'll read the next paragraph because it explains it. An EU diplomat told Euronews that the legal text governing the loan is expected to be approved by member states this week. It will include a so-called European preference, with a majority of 15 member states also backing a proposal for third country participating in the scheme to make a financial contribution. This has been championed in particular by France. France has never been against the UK taking part in the Ukraine loan, a French diplomat said. Our only point is that third countries should also contribute financially, otherwise they would be in a better situation than EU member states themselves, which would be unfair. So again, the idea that if you put European money on the table, it should go mostly to European providers. At the beginning, when there was the initial debate, France had a very radical position that was that there should be no possibility for any non-European actors to be eligible to the money that's let me rephrase that Ukraine should not be able to buy any weapon that is not European with the money that the Europeans are providing, which was seen as a fairly hardcore position. And arguably unreasonable one, because the Europeans are not providing a certain number of weapons, or they are not available in sufficient quantities. They're not necessarily the best in the field and everything, and so you kind of be undermining the defense of Ukraine just because you want to fill the how can I say the Carnegie Command you want your own industry to get the benefit from it. So France at some point was in favor of a very, very hardcore kind of position. And now they move back to a bit more realistic position. The EU will raise the money on the market and should shoulder the repayment, including interest. Contributions from third country would go towards repaying that interest, which is estimated to be around 2 to 3 billion euro per year. Currently, those costs are meant to be repaid by only 24 of the EU 27 member states, since Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic have secured an opt-out, so they will not participate to that, with individual contributions likely to be calculated based on GDP. So the richer you are, the more you contribute to the fund. A similar arrangement applying to third country is likely to be a lot more palatable to London than the one envisaged for SAFE. Up. So a reset, both economic and on security. I'll just read another article that is a bit more focused on the economic side of things, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So Starmer vows to take the UK deeper into the EU single market, seemingly buoyed, I never know how to pronounce that word, buoyed, by a positive reception and a smaller than anticipated backlash. The British PM is now doubling down on his Brexit reset. Thanks Stampus for the resub. It's time for the quiz indeed. Up, let's see what are we doing today? We will be doing question 251. Up, let me scroll. 251. 251. Ok. Let me pull up the poll. Nouveau sondage. 251, sorry. Yeah, 251. Okay. That's going to be a question about Spain. We're going south. Okay, that's an easy one. So let me just do my copy paste. I'll be a second. Up, almost done. It's gonna be very easy. Voilà. All right. Not Hungary. Yeah. We have to vary from time to time. It cannot be always about Hungary. All right. So the question I will read to you first. Fairly easy one. What was Spain's currency prior to joining the euro? Was it A, the dinar, B, the lira, C, the peseta, or D, the escudo? So, what was the Spanish currency prior to the euro? Do not spoil. Like you can vote. You can vote. You have a minute to say, and then I'll give you the right answer. You can vote. I see a very clear trend in the response. You still have about 30 seconds to vote. Up. In the meantime, I'm just double checking something. What does that work? All right. A few more seconds. Yeah, there seems to be a very clear trend. Like I said, it was an easy question. Like I can't give you like complicated questions all the time. It feels more right than the others. And you voted for the pesetas, and you were right. That's indeed that was indeed the currency of Spain prior to joining the euro. So for the other, lira was Italian. The dinar, escudo is Portugal. Dinar, I think it's Arabic, no? Yeah, that's an Arabic countries, rather Maghreb countries. Yeah, it's Morocco, Tunisia, etc. Was it worth 1,000 pesetas? I don't know. Let's check. Peseta euro exchange rate. Let's see. It was like 1 euro was 166 pesetas. Yeah, Morocco is not the dinar. It's Tunisia, Algeria, and then further. It's like there's like a dozen countries that use like a variation of the dinar. All right. So that was the question of the day, sponsored by Tempus. Up. Let's get back to our topic. Removing that. All right. So let's talk economy. So Starmer vows to take the UK deeper into the EU single market. So yeah, he wants to double down on the Brexit reset. So Keir Starmer wants to take the UK deeper into the European Union single market if Brussels will let him. Speaking to reporters during a visit to China, the British Prime Minister said he wanted to go further in aligning with the European market where it is in our national interest. In May last year, Starmer effectively agreed to take the UK back into the Brussels orbit in two sectors, agriculture and electricity. Those agreements which are currently being finalized, will see the UK follow relevant EU regulation in exchange for more seamless market access. That's the usual trade-off. You want access to the European market, you have to respect our rules. And that's typically the deal, the EEA deal. So the European Economic Area, which are like the countries that are not part of the EU, but that still get access to the EU single market, provided that A, they respect a bunch of EU rules, and B, that they pay to the budget. So it's like you're part of you can send your products to the European market, but you have to pay in exchange. And you have to respect laws that you don't have a say about. Which was something that the UK didn't want it at all during Brexit. And now times have changed in some topic. They realize that actually it's not necessarily a bad deal. So seemingly buoyed, I still don't know how to say that word. One day I will look it up. By a positive reception and a smaller than anticipated Brexiteer backlash, Starmer is now doubling down. I think the relationship with the EU and every summit should be iterative. We should be seeking to go further, the Prime Minister told reporters. And I think there are other areas in the single market where we should look to see whether we can't make more progress. That will depend on our discussions and what we think is in our national interest. But what I'm indicating here is I do think we can go further. The comments are a significant rhetorical shift for the Labour leader, whose 2024 election manifesto promised that there will be no return to the single market, as well as the customs union or free movement. Because, again, that was kind of sacred, we can't undo Brexit, etc., etc. While the Labour government has softened on the single market in office, it has arguably hardened on the customs union. Starmer told reporters that the place to look is the single market rather than a customs union, arguing that joining the latter would require unpicking trade deals struck under Britain's newly independent trade policy. So, the customs union is the fact that you have only one border outside of the EU. And that if you want to trade with the EU, you have to go through the customs border, and so you have to respect the conditions of the European trade policy. Meaning that if the UK was to join the custom policy, the custom union of the EU, that means that it would have to align on the trade deals of the EU, meaning that some of the deals that they have made since Brexit would not be valid anymore because, well, those deals were only for the UK and don't apply to the EU. While single markets, you still have like the customs of the UK, but you can send stuff easily to the EU. Provided that you respect legislation, etc., etc. While the EU officials say they are always open to concrete UK proposals, rejoining the single market sector by sector might not be entirely straightforward. So currently UK is not in the customs union, but Turkey is. Does that mean that Turkey and the EU share same tariff? Not on everything. There are a bunch of, like, Turkey is only part of the customs union on some stuff, not all of them. Don't ask me exactly which part they don't have access, because on the top of my head I don't remember, but they're not fully part of it. Like there are some areas in which they benefit from the customs union and not others. I think typically like on agricultural products and stuff like that, they are not part of it. So for those products that are outside the customs union, it's Turkish customs that apply and everything. Which may not be as advantageous as what the EU has. Negotiating sector by sector is not straightforward. Why? Because we have, that's why there's the Swiss reference. So like I said, there is this economic area, European economic area, which is you have access to the single market, but you're not part of the EU and you have to pay to the budget. Usually for these countries that are covered, so Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, these countries have a single deal that covers everything. Like they have one deal, one global deal with the EU that covers like their single market access and then research policy. So it's a global deal, one deal that covers everything. Then you have Switzerland. Switzerland, they do not have one deal. They have, if memory serves right, something around 120 deals. In the sense that they negotiated sector by sector individual deals. Because they wanted specific conditions for each deal, and they didn't want it like some things on some more political cooperation. We know that with Switzerland, like freedom movement is always complicated, etc., etc. And it has proved to be very complicated for the Europeans because, well, that means that maintaining updated 120 deals simultaneously is extremely complicated. So there's been like a long-standing negotiations with Switzerland to basically reduce or combine all these deals that they have with the EU into ideally one or far less, and that leads to complicated discussion because again the EU wants to put some additional things in it, the Swiss don't want, etc., etc. So the EU is kind of keen not to reproduce the Swiss model because for them it's like a nightmare to deal with it. Switzerland is in a special Schengen status. Now I have a doubt. Because the Swiss, they voted through one of the referendum like to question again the freedom of movement, which created tensions with the EU. Switzerland, Schengen. So yeah, they're members of Schengen, but they had issues because because of this referendum they had to put an end to not Schengen, because you could still travel within Switzerland without a visa or whatever, but it was for the people who wanted to stay more than 3 months, because Schengen visas are for 3 months, and those who wanted to stay more than 3 months, then they didn't want it, so that created a whole diplomatic backlash with the EU because they were saying, oh, so you want to prevent European workers to move or to work in Switzerland? Fine, then we're going to interrupt or make things more complicated on the deals that you need with us economically, etc. So that you had a whole standoff between Switzerland and the EU because of that. So Brussels agreed to British access for agriculture and electricity, in part because of pressure from European industry, which will arguably benefit from the new arrangement as much as the British side. But the dynamic is different in other sectors, where some European firms have been able to thrive at the expense of their locked-out British competitors. There will also be debates in Brussels about where the bloc should draw the line in granting single market access to a country that does not accept the free movement of people, a requirement other states like Norway and Switzerland must respect. Officials are worried that the EU-UK relationship may come to resemble the worst aspects of the Swiss one, a complicated mess of agreements which is subject to endless renegotiations and widely disliked in Brussels. And also, particularly, you don't want to feed into the cherry-picking thing that the Brits wanted to do initially. The Prime Minister will not elaborate on which sectors the UK should seek agreements with the EU on, stating only that we are negotiating with the EU as we go into the next summit. British officials say that for now they are focused on negotiating the agreements promised at last May's meeting. One senior business representative in Brussels, granted anonymity, said alignment in sectors including chemicals, cosmetic, and medical devices could be advantageous to businesses on both sides of the English Channel. As well as the agreement on electricity and agriculture, the UK and EU last May agreed a security agreement to cooperate more closely on defense, and to link their emission trading systems to exempt each other from their respective carbon border taxes. They also agreed to establish a youth mobility scheme, which will see young people get visas to live abroad for a limited period, which was like a whole drama because the EU wanted to re-establish Erasmus, and the UK didn't want it because symbolically that was complicated. So they had to negotiate kind of a more limited deal that allowed youth mobility, but the UK could claim that it's only within a certain number, so they're not losing control, blah blah blah. So it was about managing Brexit, UK Brexit dramas. Starmer reiterated the UK position that there has got to be a cap on the number of people who can take advantage of the scheme, and there has got to be a duration agreed. And it will be a visa-led scheme. All of our schemes are similar to that. We are negotiating, he added. So again, like still very sensitive topics. Because like freedom of movement, everybody interpreted the Brexit vote as anti-immigration vote. And so of course, anything that implies that people can move freely in the UK is kind of politically toxic. Any questions on EU UK before we move on to the next thing, which is going to be the therapy session that the Commission is going to do to make sure that they all love each other. Up. Okay, I still have some tea, so I'm good. Just check something in the meantime. All right. Okay, no questions. Let's move on to the next topic. So, Commission therapy session. Von der Leyen tries to stamp out tensions in a top team. A series of incidents involving commissioners has led to the president calling a crunch meeting. Here we are. Von der Leyen is facing the consequences of the extremely centralized and vertical governance system she has created for a second mandate, in the sense that that didn't exist in the previous mandate, but this one she has designed the commission, so the commissioners and everything, to be in a situation where they basically neutralize each other. So they share competencies. So there's no one like who has a clear-cut competence. Like everyone is kind of sharing some competencies. So they're always competing with each other. And everyone has to report to von der Leyen, which means that there's nothing that can happen without von der Leyen basically taking the lead on it and deciding on things. Which was a structure that was designed to basically prevent the emergence of a new Thierry Breton or a new Margrethe Vestager, so commissioners that would gather a lot of power, both in terms of substance and also politically, and that could potentially be seen as a rival to von der Leyen. And that's one of the reasons why she also politically executed Thierry Breton at the beginning of a mandate to make an example and send a message to the new batch of commissioners that she was the boss and she would not tolerate contestation within her team. But as time passed, we are seeing some commissioners slowly treading the line and complaining about this new way of doing things by von der Leyen, and so she's trying now to prevent an outright rebellion within her own team. So Ursula von der Leyen has summoned a team of European commissioners to a meeting to try to diffuse mounting tensions and improve the way they work. Micromanaging has a history of failure and eventual downfall. Yeah, that's she's very criticized for the hyper centralization of things. That's indeed a common theme into that second mandate. Because on the one, well, beyond the structure, the problem is that it also slows down lots of processes, because since everything has to be approved by von der Leyen's cabinet, that means that they are flooded with stuff. and they can't deal with everything at once, and so it slows down a lot of process because, well, you have to wait for Bjorn Zerber to so the head of cabinet of von der Leyen to give the okay, and so everything is slowed down, or it even creates mistake because then they have to go quickly through stuff and they miss things, etc., etc. So it creates many problems within the workflow. So the meeting is set for the 4th of February in Leuven and is open to all members of the college, though attendance is not mandatory according to commission officials involved in organizing the event. The idea for such a meeting was conceived after tense exchanges between commissioners and frustration at the repeated late arrivals of files on the desk of top officials, commission officials said. Politicals spoke to 8 officials from different commissioners' cabinets, all of whom were granted anonymity. While the meeting will focus on competitiveness and will feature a special guest, the International Monetary Fund Managing Director and former Commission Vice President Kristalina Georgieva, also on the agenda are discussing on geopolitics in the current context and the working methods of the European Commission, Commission Deputy Chief Spokesperson Ariana Podesta told Politico. Doesn't the EP say what are the competencies of different commission, or does it simply elect the commission president and then the president is free to do whatever they want? The structure of the commission, so the spreading of the portfolio, is a full competence of the president. Von der Leyen, the president of the commission, has full authority on splitting competencies within among the commissioners. She can do pretty much whatever she wants. I mean, on paper, she can do whatever she wants on this. In practice, there's tons of negotiations with the member states because they want their commissioner to get that portfolio, etc., etc. But on paper, it's fully and exclusively the competence of the president of the commission, which allows to give powerful portfolio to some people, much weaker ones to others. Like for instance, typically the Hungarian one gets a shitty portfolio because they want to be they have to be kept at bay because Orban and everything. But what the parliament has done, and that has also what the parliament has done, so the parliament has parliamentary committees, legal affairs committee, internal market committee, etc., etc. So the committees in which they work on legislation. Originally, the parliament built, so there's 22 I think permanent committees, and initially the parliament built these these committees to sort of reflect the structure of the commission. Basically, the commission has this portfolio, so that things that come out of this portfolio go to that committee to facilitate the work. Problem is that since from one commission to another, you may have some evolution. I mean, you have stuff that are always there. You will always have a commissioner to agriculture, a commissioner to foreign affairs, etc. So there are things that are permanent, but other things are then split between different commissioners, which in turn can create tensions within the parliament, because when it arrives in parliament, they're like, oh, but actually it can be relevant for different committees and everything. So there's been a complaint of the parliament of saying, okay, even if the president is competent to decide the structure of its commission, it would be good if they don't go too creative, because then, well, within parliament we have also to make sure that the committees are adapted to that. Otherwise, it complicates the work for everyone. So that's usually part of the discussions between the parliament and the commission on how they can improve their working relations. But formally, president of the commission has full authority on the competencies of the different commissioners. The parliament, they vote for the president of the commission, they vote for the committee, the entire commission with all the commissioners. They do hearings to each individual commissioners, so they can, in theory, de facto veto one or more of them. But that's it. Like they can't threaten like the. I mean, technically they could. They have a veto at the beginning, so technically they could use whatever excuse they want if they want to threaten a veto. It has never happened so far that they threaten to vote to refuse the conference to the commission because the commission is built in a particular way. Like they can veto a particular commissioner. Like for instance, they could say, okay, I don't want this commissioner because let's say he's Hungarian and so he's getting too much power, etc., etc., etc. But that's something that the commission will anticipate. But yeah, no, I have never seen like the parliament threatening a vote of no confidence because of the way the commission was built. Where was I? So the later element was prompted by what staffers inside the Berlaymont, the Commission HQ, described as an unusually tense atmosphere. The spark for the idea of the meeting, according to 4 of the Commission officials, was a tense exchange in early December in which Dan Jorgensen, the Energy Commissioner, who is also a socialist, confronted Executive Vice President Teresa Ribera during a meeting of the College of Commissioners, Ribera being also socialist, as first reported in Brussels Playbook. Both commissioners declined to comment on the incident, but one official said Jorgensen had raised his voice when confronting Ribera, while another said the Danish commissioner made a point toward Ribera that was unusually forceful by college standard as they discussed a key environmental file. Jorgensen will be attending the 4th of February meeting, his team said. Ribera's team did not respond. Meetings of the full college in the new year are not unusual, and in fact have been a regular practice since 2010, Podesta told Politico. It's a regular thing, that usually after holiday breaks, the commission will meet, like they do a retreat where everyone comes and discuss and coordinate for the new year, the new period and everything. That's a fairly regular thing. However, this one features a section explicitly dedicated to finding better working methods and preventing difference of opinion between commissioners from getting out of hand. Description of the meeting varied, with one official calling it talks rather than a formal team-building exercise, and another describing it as a working group on working methods. Classic commission. Several cabinets are growing frustrated with files arriving on their desk just hours before college meetings, or late at night on the weekend, or on the eve of the presentation of legal proposal. Because again, since everything is decided at the top, it's getting clogged, they take decision at the last time, and then the commissioners in charge discover at the last minute the thing that has been approved by van der Leyen, the vice president, and everything. This prevents us from working professionally, one official said. Of course, emergency happen, but this can't be the norm. The frustration peaked during the presentation of the EU long-term budget plan last July, when official figures were reportedly shared with commissioners only hours before the presentation. According to officials close to van der Leyen's cabinet, the late arrival of the budget figures was justified as a tactic to prevent leaks. Or because they were deciding until the last second how they would move the needle on this or that fund, depending on the feedback they got from the capitals. But the approach has only deepened irritation within the college. According to one official, the altercation between Jorgensen and Ribera also concerned fast-tracking files. To get a file presented to the college, an executive vice president must push the button, Berlaymont jargon, for putting something on the agenda. Faced with a tight deadline to examine the details of a file, the environmental omnibus designed to simplify green rules, Ribera decided to wait before pushing the button, as she is entitled to do, according to her team. This led to tensions with Jorgensen, a fellow member of the socialist family, because he was expecting his file to be put on the table, but since Ribera didn't have time to process it, she didn't, and so again, that creates tension. One commission official noted that both center-left commissioners led teams with strong views, making frictions likely. There's a lot more infighting in the college than one might think. The college is what you call the all the commissioners put together, and we call that the college. A commission official said. Some of these frictions reflect genuine differences of opinion, but are magnified by a highly centralized system in which many decisions must get approval on the 13th floor of the Berlaymont, home to von der Leyen's cabinet. The way it works now creates situations that are avoidable and some problems where there aren't any, another official said. Jorgensen and Ribera are not the only pair under strain. Tensions have surfaced between Executive Vice President Stéphane Séjourné and Health Commissioner Oliver Warilly, for example, particularly over the Biotech Act. Warilly has long, so the Hungarian one, has long objected to the package's non-health element, and insiders says his resistance has only hardened as Séjourné pushed a broader industrial strategy. Two officials also say Warilly's behavior is sometimes interpreted as provocative, keeping his phone ringtone on or sprawling in his chair. According to the same officials, Warilly has even insisted that only von der Leyen, not fellow commissioners, may substitute for him at events. Neither Séjourné nor Warilly responded to requests for comments. Séjourné will not be present at the seminar as he is taking part in ministerial discussion in Washington on critical raw materials, but will submit written contribution according to his team. Warilly, on his side, did not confirm if he could be attending the 4th of February meeting. Commission officials say that friction between Executive Vice President and other commissioners is almost built into the system, because again, you have this competition between commissioners decided by von der Leyen to weaken them, basically. Because if you have the commissioners that are fighting each other over competencies, then the one who is the arbiter of truth, the one who decides at the end, well, that's von der Leyen because she's at the top of the pyramid. So Executive Vice Presidents are meant to coordinate and oversee the work of others, whereas under EU law, all commissioners are supposed to be equal. That ambiguity, one official said, is manageable on good days, but doesn't help when tempers flare. Von der Leyen did not respond to requests for comments, and the meeting comes ahead of the EU leaders' retreat on competitiveness scheduled for the 12th of February. So this time it's a meeting of the head of states of government, EU head of states and government. So yeah, the mood is a bit angry within the commission, largely because of von der Leyen's own structure. But yeah. Any questions on that? Before we move on to the socialists in the parliament kind of trying to cope with the new political situation where the EPP does what it wants. Checking on the side. Okay, we're good. Okay. Moving on. And then we have one final article. So a slightly older article, but it's context for they're doing an English article, so and it's interesting, so I thought it was worth a read. So as power slips, socialists weigh compromise against conviction. The EPP's willingness to rely on far-right votes has undermined the SND, the socialist role as a power broker in the European Parliament. Now the center-left is struggling to recalibrate. Let me zoom a bit. There we go. The Socialists and Democrats, so the second biggest group in the European Parliament, are soul-searching. A shift in balance of power in the European Parliament has undercut the political group's influence, exposing a rift over how far it should compromise to remain relevant. Stripped of its traditional role as a parliamentary kingmaker amid the rise of the far right, the SND is rethinking its strategy, with tensions flaring over whether to prioritize pragmatism or principle. In the parliament, you don't have a single party having the majority, but historically, you always had a cooperation between the EPP, so the Conservative, and the Socialists, who were forming a majority with the two of them, and the Liberals forming like the the third wheel and completing the majority whenever it was needed. And so the EU policies were decided by the compromises between the EPP and the socialists and liberals. Until now, because 2024 election creates a brand new situation where the EPP is not obliged to form a majority with the socialists. For the first time, they have a choice. They can choose to build a majority with their traditional partners, so the socialists and the liberals, or they can rely on an alternative majority called the Venezuela majority, where they get a majority by teaming up with the far right, which the EPP has been using since the beginning of the mandate on specific topics where they have divergence with the centrist parties to, so typically migration, agriculture, environment, etc., etc. Basically to weaken the socialists and the liberals and try to force them to get closer, to abandon their historical position and to get closer to the EPP in terms of position. And that has kind of thrown a brick into the way things were working into until now. And creating a situation where the EPP is the absolute kingmaker. They basically decide on a certain number of topics who wins. And the socialists don't know really how to manage to deal with that because, well, they don't want to paralyze the parliament, so they need to work with the EPP on many things. But at the same time, the EPP is weaponizing the far right to try to isolate them and to force things that they definitely do not support, and breaking the cordon sanitaire that was the rule until now. I can't wait for Trump kidnapping the other. Yeah, so he would kidnap. He would kidnap Manfred. I'm not sure Manfred would be happy about that. Where was I? In a sign of testy times, socialist leaders are waiting whether to impose stricter discipline, an unprecedented move that reflects how deep the group's struggles run. As the European Parliament confronts major challenges, from a fraught relationship with Washington to boosting security and jump-starting the bloc's economy, where the socialists land in the tug-of-war between principles and realpolitik may have far-reaching consequences for the continent. For the first time in European Parliament history, two vote-winning majorities are possible, both anchored by the center-right EPP, one a centrist pro-European bloc, which includes the SND and the liberal Renew Europe, and the other a right-leaning alliance embracing the far right. The reality of that calculation hit home last year through a chain of events that sparked political instability. An ideological rift over the Commission's simplification agenda, which aims to roll back regulation in a bid to boost the bloc's competitiveness, so it's simplification, but actually it's deregulation, has upended the centrist coalition. In an October 2025 plenary vote, an estimated quarter of SND MEPs, primarily from the French, Austrian, and Dutch delegations, broke ranks to oppose a compromise on updated corporate due diligence rules backed by their own leadership. Basically, what happened is that on that simplification file, the EPP went to the socialists and the liberals and said, okay, I'm putting two compromises on the table. One compromise is that I'm ready to make with you, which is largely what I want, and you have to swallow everything. Or, if you don't like that compromise, I can have another compromise that goes even further, adopted with the far right. You choose. So basically putting the knife at the throat and say, okay, either you align with me, or I do a deal with the far right. And after many drama and back and forth, the socialist leadership decided to back reluctantly the proposal of the EPP which pissed off part of its own troops, who decide to vote against. When so many members are not aligned, it is no longer a discipline problem, it's a problem of political line, French SND MEP Christophe Clergeau told Context. The rupture deepened the months later when the EPP relied on far-right votes to push the fight through, sidelining its traditional centrist partners and effectively shattering the informal cordon sanitaire, a shift that pushed the parliament's balance of power to the right. For the SND, that move marked a turning point. It was a moment of clarity, said MEP René Repasi, the head of the German SND delegation. We now know that the EPP does not attach value to the fact that we work together in the center. It's a majority like any other. SND leadership is considering creating a new whip-style mechanism, or whip is the name that you give to the basically vote discipline. When the party says, okay, you have to vote like this, the whip is it's the guy that is tasked with enforcing that and making sure that everyone is following the group line. Otherwise, you have sanctions of different nature. So creating a new whip-style mechanism to coordinate and enforce members' attendance and participation during key debates and votes, said Andrea Maceras, spokesperson of the group leader Iraxte Garcia. The tool will also monitor attendance and engagement and ensure proper accountability. The socialist group, long accustomed to relying on members' shared principle, has traditionally exercised a looser hand over its MEPs than the EPP. The latter moves quickly to sanction unruly members by stripping them of rapporteur roles, limiting their speaking times in plenary, or barring them from closed-door meetings. Oh, yes and no. In the sense that, so, in the EPP you have whip rules, so indeed you can get sanctioned if you don't follow the line on some things. It's only on, let's say, specific fights, priority fights that are like on most issues, actually, like the EPP is not cracking the whip against its members. It's really on very specific things that then you can have the vote discipline. Otherwise, it's mostly fine. How can the whole EPP be okay with that strategy? There is some country that still practice a strong cordon sanitaire within it, such as Belgium, Portugal, Spain. The strong cordon sanitaire in Spain, debatable. Parti Popular and Vox have been circling each other for quite some time. But even within the EPP, it's debated. You have, so within DPP, you have the president of DPP, Manfred Weber, who has been pushing the party further to the right. His argument being, if we want to stop, or if we want to stop the rise of the far right, we have to harden our policy to reflect what people want, particularly on migration, on agriculture, on environment, etc., etc. And also that's a good reason. That's a good way to put pressure on the socialists and everything, and to push them to embrace, to go further to the right. We are the center of gravity, so we should be the ones defining the line. So he's been pushing further to the right the party, hoping also to get part of the ECR to get closer to the EPP rather than going with the far right. There's the whole thing. Within the EPP, not everyone is necessarily happy with that. You have some delegations that are very happy with it, like the French. French are very happy to go closer to the far right. Others, not so much. Typically, indeed, Belgians, Luxembourgish, not really. They are closer to the center-right kind of line. Even The Polish, depending on the topics, also not so much because they have a very strong bad relationship with the Polish far right. So they're not so keen on becoming BFF with the far right inside the European Parliament. But for now, Manfred is winning the game. So, question being, how long can he push without creating huge issues within his own group and without breaking definitively the alliance with the socialist? Manfred considering that the socialists will not dare, for instance, table a motion of censure against von der Leyen, or that they would always break under pressure when faced by an ultimatum by DPP, which, to be fair, I would say is a fair assessment. And like when there were pressure, the SND always folded, notably following intervention from Pedro Sanchez, who was putting pressure on Iraste Garcia, so the president of the Socialists. So, for the time being, and also the election showed that the strategy of Manfred works. Like, DPP is winning through that strategy. One might disagree with it, but he's winning with it. The debate being how far can he push until he breaks, and easy crossing a point of no return. That's where the debate is. So yeah. Where was I? Alright. Ramping up internal control to steady the ship was one idea that emerged following a December retreat in Antwerp with Garcia, a vice president, and the heads of the national delegations. However, several SND officials contact spokes too, poured cold water on the idea, describing it as a leadership fantasy that would not function in practice. While agreeing that greater party cohesion is useful, most doubted that a strict whip system would materialize. The ideological differences in the group cannot be solved through a firmer end, they argued. The issue is sensitive, reflected by socialist lawmakers' unease about candidly speaking about this. Yeah, indeed, because even within a political group at EU level, not everyone exactly thinks the same thing. So you always add you never add like a very strong vote discipline because you naturally add like natural divergences at national level. Is the CDU-CSU closing the gap with the AfD? Not necessarily. And there you have the big question of what Merz will allow or not. Because like until recently, Manfred was king in his kingdom, in his domain, and he was in a situation where there was no like CDU German chancellor, so he could do pretty much what he wanted. Now that Merz is in power, so himself, CDU-CSU, so the same group as the same party as Manfred Weber. Merz is in a coalition with the socialist. Merz might also decide to put some limits on Weber if he sees that he does things that would help AfD or threaten the coalition in Germany. So you will also have like a dynamic between Manfred Weber and Merz on how far Manfred can push things without Merz cracking the whip and telling him to stop. And the argument of Manfred is always to say, well, I'm not building an alliance with the far right. We don't have a structured collaboration with the far right. They just happen to vote with us, which is half true, in the sense that yes, there is no structured alliance with the far right, and actually on most topics, the EPP does not work with the far right. It's only on a minority of topics that they do. A minority of topics that are politically very visible, but a minority nonetheless. And also, they say, yeah, well, I'm just putting my position on the table, and the other are voting for it. What can I do? Which is bad faith, because they do that knowing very well that the far right will vote in favor and give them a majority most of the time. So there's a bit / a lot of bad faith in that line of argument. But that allows to maintain the idea that, okay, no, we're not in an alliance with AfD because on most topics we don't agree, and not our fault if they vote for us when we table our amendments. The far right itself being quite keen on doing that because they see that as a way to weaken the alliance with the socialists and the liberals. And the EPP and the far right are in a kind of a tug of war where the EPP is hoping to bring more towards the center part, notably of DCR, typically Meloni. They would dream of having Meloni, like maybe not joining the EPP, but stay anchored in with the center right. While the far right is trying to drag the EPP further and further to the right and push the alliance with the socialists to a breaking point and tell them, well, you don't your alliance with the socialists is dead. You need to make an alliance with us. So to do the Union des Droites, which the EPP does not want to do at the moment. Where was I? So one of the SND's core challenges is that its internal fault lines run largely along national lines, particularly over how closely to work with the EPP. The French and Dutch delegation blamed the EPP for legitimizing the far right, including France's resurgent Rassemblement National, and want the SND to take a tougher stance against the parliament's biggest group. The German, Spanish, and Italian delegations, in contrast, favor a pragmatic approach, backing the EPP when interests align and shifting into opposition when they do not. I'm surprised by the Italians. I would have seen the Italians like more aligned with the French, but at the same time they have an agreement with the Spanish to try to take over the leadership. So maybe that's that. Romanian MEPs, similarly, are comfortable with pro-industry position, preferring to move towards right-leaning partners on simplification legislation than tack left. Despite resistance from part of the group, the SND leadership has favored keeping the door open to the Christian Democrats. We will continue extending a hand to the EPP, but we do it out of European responsibility, said SND President Garcia, speaking at a plenary session in late November. Socialist Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is partly behind the group's conciliatory approach, according to two SND sources granted anonymity to speak freely. One of the only 3 socialist leaders in the European Council, Sanchez is allegedly keen to avoid the group being seen as a destabilizing force by blocking legislation, a move that would draw ire from his conservative colleagues. And so, whenever, like that's the pattern, that tends to validate what Manfred is saying. Whenever there was very high tensions between the socialists and the EPP, and that the socialists were starting to say, oh yeah, we're going to block something, Pedro Sanchez picks up the phone, calls Garcia, so the chair of the socialists in the parliament, who is Spanish, and tells her, well, shut the fuck up, and vote with the EPP. And Garcia is like, sir, yes sir, and does it. Sorry, just getting notification, just checking that it's nothing important. Okay. SND staffers in favor of the continued cooperation with the EPP warned that breaking with the EPP would only strengthen the far right at the center-left expense. The consequence of the confrontational approach is less influence, said an official from Spain's SND delegation. Which can be debatable. I mean, you can argue that if SND decide to stop collaborating with the EPP, well, then the EPP will go work with the far right. And say, well, it's not my fault if the socialists don't want to work with me. You can make the counter argument that since on most issues the EPP actually does not agree with the far right, they would not be keen on making a deal with the far right because, well, they simply don't agree. If EPP and the far right on European integration, they're not really aligned. Rather the contrary. And so that was if the EPP, if the SND were playing hard, well, the EPP, since they don't want to work with the far right because they simply don't agree with them, would become more conciliatory. So you could argue both. You could argue both. Right? There are arguments for both lines. Still, some want that compromise has limits. The group has certain principles we do not bargain on, Maltese SND Vice President Alexios Saliba told Context. German MEP René Repasi echoed the concern, cautioning against abandoning red lines simply to secure a centrist majority. What those red lines are and how they are used in negotiations is unclear for some lawmakers. Everything is done on the sly, said one SND MEP from a Western European country, criticizing the leadership management. The uncertainty is also unsettling the group's centrist ally, Renew Europe. It's hard to understand the SND strategy, said a senior Renew official. One day they're opposing the EPP, and the next they're with them. The Liberals, they're even like in a worse position because they spend their time like going between mommy and daddy and trying to prevent the divorce. EPP officials approached by Context declined to comment on their relationship with the SND. And there's also like it's very like also like varying, like in the sense that in some committees you will have, like I said, because it's on topic per topic. In some committees there will be clearly a tendency of the EPP to try to undermine the center and the left by making deals with the far right. In other committees, the policy of the cordon sanitaire remains and they do everything they can to actually isolate the far right as they used to do in the past. Problem is that it really depends of whether your committee is dealing with things where the EPP is in an open war with the SND, or if it's one of those many topics where actually they are still on the business as usual kind of approach. So depending on which committee you are, if you are in Envy or if you are in Cult, you have completely different kind of vibe. Also depending on which part of the far right is present in the room. Of course, if you have a Polish ECR, discussion is a bit more compelling than if it's an Italian. Okay, the next litmus test for the SND cohesion will be the upcoming stream of simplification bills stretched across various sectors and once more testing the group's principle, which the parliament will have to negotiate. In practice, this will likely mean a selective partnership with the EPP. Only on topics where the EPP needs us, said French lawmaker Jean-Marc Germain. On the rest, the SND will be in opposition. Which is probably going to be the reverse, like by default, they're going to be in partnership with the EPP, and on some topics, they will be in opposition. The proposed 2028-2034 EU budget is emerging as a key leverage point. With far-right groups typically hostile to EU spending, centrists retain influence, and socialists are looking to use it to push for a larger budget and a greater EU share of tax revenues. Similarly, the 21st of January move to freeze Parliament's work on the EU-US trade deal exposed no cracks among centrists, underlining how external pressure can still unite them, although the DPP resisted until the very end. And the debate was whether, given what was happening in Greenland, the pressure, the threat of Trump on Greenland, whether or not to freeze the discussions, the ratification of the EU-US trade deal on industrial products. The socialists and the Greens and the Liberals were in favor of freezing the work, and the EPP resisted pretty much until the end, until the moment where Trump threatened to relaunch a trade war over Greenland, and so then they followed the movement, but initially they didn't want it to to freeze the trade agreement because they were saying, oh yeah, no, trade and Greenland are two different topics, we should not mix them, etc., etc. If the socialists fail to rein in the right-wing coalition, some are floating a fallback, use the power of another EU institution, the European Council. In the past, it was rather Parliament that was more progressive than Repasi. Now the Council may be the institution of reason. Socialists hold key position in enough coalition government across the EU, from Germany, Spain and Denmark, to create a blocking minority, the German lawmaker said. That blocking minority can always say that we accept no deal in trialogue where Parliament can only vote with the far. Well, there, that's a bit wishful thinking, because the Council defend national interest. Like, they are not going to do things depending on Parliament dynamic. However, what has happened is that since the EPP is taking a hardcore position, aligning with the far right, that hardcore position often did not reflect the compromise possible in Council. And so you had a situation where the EPP was made a compromise with the far right, pushing very far, and then when they reach the trilogue, so negotiation with the Council, they find themselves isolated because the Council and the Commission are far less radical than the EPP. And then within the Parliament, well, the other are saying, yeah, well, we are fine with the Council position. So the EPP is then forced to abandon key parts of its deal with the far right to align with what the Council is doing. So in the end, actually, the thing that is happening is that the new position of consensus becomes the Council position. Because on one end, so you have the Commission proposal, then Council usually is pushing it forward, and usually you had the Parliament pushing the other way. And so you had the tug of war between Parliament and Council around the position of the Commission. Now, on the topics that are controversial, you have Council going a bit further, and then Venezuela coalition going even further, meaning that the Council position becomes the de facto medium point. And the Parliament then is obliged to give up on stuff to align de facto on the Council, because that's the de facto medium position for a majority. And we've seen a few examples of that, like where the EPP pushed hard in Parliament, won, and then had to give up everything that they had negotiated with the far right in Council, because Council was like, you know, fuck you, we're not going that far because our compromise does not allow to go that far. But the idea that the Germans, the Spanish, and the Danish government would say, oh no, we're not saying anything that is supported by the far right, very much wishful thinking. They won't care at all the dynamics of the Parliament. They will say, you know, we want this, and not the line. Any questions on that before we move on to our final topics, which is going to be about the push of the EU to become less dependent on the US? Sorry. Up. I don't see any question. Let's go to our final article. So unless you've been living under a rock, you may have caught that relationship between the EU and the US are not at their best. There's been a couple of tensions. Pushing the EU to think, well, maybe the days where we were hyper dependent on the US, but we could rely, it was a reliable ally, those days are gone. And we need to, to be more, do our own thing more often. Question is, how do you deal with that? Do that transition without triggering too much the US, because at the moment you can't afford to not be dependent on them, etc., etc. And so starts the slow process of reducing in some areas the dependence on the Americans. So Europe begins its slow retreat from US dependence. The EU aims to reduce reliance on America in areas such as technology, energy, payment, and defense. That will take some time. European governments and corporations are racing to reduce their exposure to US technology, military hardware, and energy resources as transatlantic relations sour. For decades, the EU relied on NATO guarantees to ensure the security of the bloc and on American technologies to power its businesses. Donald Trump's threat to take over Greenland and aggressive comments about Europe by members of its administration have given fresh impetus to European leaders' call for independence. That's the new word in fashion in EU circles. Until now, we had the idea of strategic autonomy, so that in critical areas, the EU should be able to be autonomous, like to be self-reliant on some things. And now, since last year, the Commission and member states are pushing the idea of independence, in the sense that it's not just some key topics. Like in general, we need to be much more independent, because, well, even the people, those we were relying on in the past, they are turning their back on us. So that's you see a growing trend of the idea of Europe becoming less and less reliant on the outside. Well, not reliant. That's not the right word, but far less in a single dependency towards one actor. To the point that dependency is weaponized by that other actor. If we want to be taken seriously again, we will have to learn the language of power politics, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said last week. From orders banning civil servants from using US-based video conferencing tools to trade deals with countries like India to a push to diversify Europe's energy suppliers, efforts to minimize European dependence on the US are gathering pace. E-readers warn that transatlantic relations are unlikely to return to the pre-Trump status quo. The good old days are gone, and are gone for good. The assumption that Trump was just an anomaly, that the US would become sane again, like now everybody knows that that's a done deal. We lost the US for the next generation. EU officials stress that such measures amount to de-risking Europe's relationship with the US rather than decoupling, a term that implies a clean break in economic and strategic ties. Until recently, both expressions were mainly applied to European efforts to reduce dependence on China. Now they are coming up in relations to the US, Europe's main trade partner and security benefactor. So, the difference between de-risking and decoupling is you put an end to all relations. Like, there is no more links between you and that other entity. De-risking is saying, okay, there's still going to be links between the EU and that other country, but we are reducing them to a point where if tension arise, those relationships cannot be weaponized against us. They cannot be used against us because we are too dependent on them. Until now, that was the strategy, that was the approach on EU-China relations, and now that's also becoming the standard, the new standard for the US. Even if that's much more complicated because the level of interconnection between the EU and the US is much more important than it was between the EU and China, making that de-risking much more complex to achieve and also long to do. The decoupling drive is in its infancy. The US remains by far the largest trading partner for Europe, and it would take years for the bloc to wean itself off American tech and military support, according to Jean-Luc Demarty, who was in charge of the European Commission's Trade Department under the body's former president, Jean-Claude Juncker. In terms of trade, the US represents a significant share of our exports, said Demarty, so it's a lot, but it's not a matter of life and death. So from memory, the US, as far as trade of goods are concerned, that's about 18%, I think. 18% of our trade in goods is with the US. It's the biggest one. And if you take all trade between the EU and the US on goods and services going both sides, to give you an idea of the size of the size of it, the entire EU-US trade relation represents 30% of all the trade in the world. So if you take all the trade in the world, goods, services, etc., EU-US, 30% of it. It's a third of all the world's trade. So it's massive. Meaning that you can't snap your fingers and make it gone. The push to diversify away from the US has seen Brussels strike trade deals with the Mercosur bloc of Latin American countries, India and Indonesia in recent months. The Commission also revamped its deal with Mexico and revived stalled negotiations with Australia. So given that Trump is using trade war more and more, tariffs and everything, the US is like, okay, we need to find new friends. And so relaunch the push for trade so that that share of 18% of trade with the US, well, slowly becomes less and less. It will still be important because realistically, trade with the US will always be important, but reduces so that we become less sensitive, and there are alternatives for European companies as far as trade is concerned. Since the continent emerged from the ashes of World War II, Europe has relied for its security on NATO, which the US contributes the bulk of funding to. At a weekend retreat in Zagreb, Croatia, conservative European leaders, including Merz, said it was time for the bloc to beef up its homegrown mutual defense clause, which binds EU countries to an agreement to defend any EU countries that comes under attack. So that's the 42.7 clause of the treaties that says, okay, if a country is attacked, a EU member state is attacked, there is a duty of mutual assistance. That clause being very theoretical and still be very linked to NATO, because that clause does say, okay, the implementation of that mutual assistance is done first and foremost through NATO. So they are very clear link with NATO. Because historically, the NATO was handling the military matters, the defense common security matters, and the EU was dealing with economics and all the civilian matters. Now that NATO is a bit shaken by Trump, increasingly the EU is interested in dealing with military stuff. And so that creates the question, okay, how do we deal with NATO? How do we beef up our own clauses on defense, etc., etc.? While it has existed since 2009, the EU's Article 42.7 mutual defense clause was rarely seen as necessary because NATO's Article 5 served a similar purpose. But Europe's government have started to doubt whether the US really would come to Europe's rescue. In Zagreb, the leaders embraced the EU's new role as a security actor, tasking two leaders, as yet unnamed, with rapidly cooking up plans to turn the EU clause from words into an ironclad security council. Just for clarity, here we're not talking about European Council, we're talking about EPP. And the EPP had a meeting, a congress in Zagreb, and so you had the EPP head of state and government that were there. So here we're talking about an EPP process. It's not a EU-wide thing. For decades, some countries said, "We have NATO, why should we have parallel structures?" said a senior EU diplomat who was granted anonymity. After Trump's Greenland saber rattling, we are faced with the necessity, we have to set up military command structure within the EU, which is still debatable because you create a parallel structure to NATO, and actually Kaja Kallas, the de facto Minister of Foreign Affairs of the EU, push back against that idea of making the EU army the EU Security Council, because they say, okay, we have today we have NATO command structure. If the EU does its own thing, while we are still part of NATO, you're just going to create complexity, and if a crisis actually happens, there's going to be a conflict of competence. Like, if there's a crisis happening, okay, who is handling it? NATO? The EU? With what forces, etc. So you're creating just additional complexity to something that is already complicated. If NATO was to fall, that's another discussion, but the fact is that beyond the US participation, NATO has a tried and tested structure. We need to learn to be more like De Gaulle when it comes to the defense of our continent. Yes, I mean, again, debatable. The thing is you don't do that in the snap of a finger. That's a process that takes years and years and years that you don't necessarily have. And then the question is, you have NATO. Do you need to drop NATO altogether, so you dissolve NATO because the US is part of it and you create something entirely new? Or do you still keep NATO and you just reinforce the European part of it? Because NATO has a very long experience. Literally, they were created for this. You have a tried and tested like command structure, the logistical infrastructure and everything. So you have many things beyond the participation of the Americans that are working. If you delete that and you say Europe is going to do it, okay, you have to build the things in the first place. The EU has no experience in military stuff, so you would have to rebuild completely what NATO has done over 70 years, which means that you would be not as effective as NATO was. Build a pile on the EU and leave NATO. Well, I mean, again, that's the point of Kaja Kallas today. Kaja Kallas is saying, okay, let's say you want to create something in parallel of NATO. EU countries only have one army and one budget. They were not going to sustain two armies, one for NATO and one for the EU. They were not going to put, 5% for NATO and also 5% for the EU. That's not going to happen. So if you are doing things in parallel, you're making things more complicated. You're just undermining both organizations because they will be competing with each other to do the same thing. So doing things in parallel, you're just going to create problems for the sake of creating problems. And then the problem again is not NATO in itself. Like, the problem is the attitude of the US. Take aside the attitude of the US, NATO is working perfectly well. You have the common structure, you have the logistics, the exercise. It's a tool that works. The problem is the US. So, where there is a question is the US staying in NATO? If, let's say, Trump decides at some point to leave NATO, do you dissolve NATO? Or do you just like keep NATO? It's just without the Americans. I mean, in any case, NATO without the Americans is still largely European. If you dissolve NATO, if the US stays in NATO, then you have a question, okay, how do we maintain NATO working without it being sabotaged? But again, even if you create something outside of NATO, I mean, again, the problem is just the US. Like, all the Europeans agree that whatever security arrangement exists would have to include Norway, would have to include Canada, would have to include the UK. So basically, most of the current NATO members. It's just the US that is problematic. You can make a question mark on what you would do with Turkey. That's another question. But for the others, it's just it's working. There's no problem. So you would just be duplicating things that currently work with NATO as part of an organization that has no experience in doing what NATO does. So let's say that saying, oh yeah, the problem is NATO, and we should drop NATO to do our own thing. That might be a short-sighted decision, or a case of throwing the baby with the bathwater. Then again, you have another issue, is that you have a potential issue if, for instance, the US decides not to leave NATO, but then undermines NATO actively, like currently Trump is doing. Trump is not leaving NATO, he's part of NATO, but is actively undermining it. Then you have a question, because you have if the US creates a situation where NATO would be de facto paralyzed, that's another discussion. Would the US go as far, etc.? That's another debate that depends on US politics. But I mean, that's why when there was there was and still is all the debates around Greenland, Denmark was saying what is at stake is the survival of NATO. Because if the US invades Greenland, it's NATO allies invading each other, so the thing collapses. And also imagine a situation where one NATO country asks for the help of NATO, and the US puts a veto on it. NATO becomes completely neutralized, and the thing collapses on itself. Which goes against the interest of the US as well, because the US needs NATO. That's why I would say that as things currently are in US politics, I don't see Trump leaving NATO. I don't see him leaving NATO, because that would simply not fly at national level. But still, he could not undermine. Nonetheless, indeed, there is a point. The point is, besides NATO, is okay, we have a lack of military capabilities. That is an objective thing, NATO or no NATO. We don't have enough stuff. Our armies are not equipped, they are not capable of waging a large-scale conventional war like we are seeing in Ukraine, so we need to build up. That's something that is happening, like that the EU is doing. That's why you have SAFE, that's why you have EDIP, etc., etc. Is how do we rebuild like our military capacities? You have other questions about logistics, saying, okay, how do we make sure that if there is an issue, you can move quickly troops from point A to point B? Those are things that actually, when we talk about EU defense policy, that's actually what really we're talking about. Like the European army, that's that's just a fantasy of federalists or anti-NATO people, etc. Like nobody is actually talking about the EU army. Nobody needs the EU army. That's not the point today. That's not the issue. Like I made the point like many times, but the European army is like the very final stage after you solved a million other problems. Intelligence is a problem for us. So yeah, of course. They are key capabilities in which Europe is lacking. Intelligence, logistical supplies, like particularly long distance travel, transport. I don't know how to say ravitaillement. Like air supply, air refueling. Those sort of capacities, Europe does not have them. The US has them. And those are things that indeed need to be worked on. Like for instance, like you're speaking about intelligence. Like for instance, you had the new Dutch government that has just concluded its coalition agreement, and within that coalition agreement, they pushed the idea of creating an intelligence sharing, a kind of equivalent to the Five Eyes, which is the American Alliance of Intelligence Sharing. And so the Dutch are proposing that the EU does the same. Although again, on intelligence sharing, NATO is doing stuff like that. You also have another problem, which is services not trusting each other. Typically, on intelligence, something that we know is that even within NATO, there are some information that are not shared, for instance, with the Hungarians, because they know that somehow it's ending up on the Russian side. So you have a question also of trust between intelligence services, etc. So you have all other things. Yeah, well, it's fine. There's plenty of capacities that we do not have at the moment, which feeds into like when we have the discussions on Ukraine and what weapons they should buy with EU money. One of the reasons why there is an opening to the fact that they can use European money to buy non-European weapons is because on certain capabilities, for instance, anti-air, Europeans don't have the stuff. The Americans and others have the stuff. So yeah, we don't have a European alternative. Anyway, where was I? Okay, yeah, I just finished reading that. So, in comments to EU lawmakers last week, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that anyone who believes Europe can defend itself without the US should keep on dreaming, which is true right this second. At medium/long term, that's another debate. Depends of the willingness to do what needs to be done. But as things currently stand, as of today, 3rd of February 2026, yes, like Europe's defense relies on the US. That's an absolute truth, that's true. But for the future, it would require huge efforts, material and political, but you could still make it a reality. Europe remains heavily reliant on US military capabilities, most notably in its support for Ukraine's fight against Russia. But some Europeans are now openly talking about the price of reducing exposure to the US and saying it's manageable. The mood shift is clearest when it comes to technology, where European reliance on platforms such as X, Meta, and Google has long troubled EU voters, as evidenced by broad support for the bloc's tech legislation. French President Emmanuel Macron's government is planning to ban officials from using US-based video conferencing tools, so Teams, etc. Other countries like Germany are contemplating similar moves. And I think within the Commission there's also a reflection on that. It's very clear that Europe is having our independence moment, EU Tech Tsar Ena Virkkunen told the Politico conference last week. During the last year, everybody has really realized how important it is that we are not dependent on one country or one company when it comes to some very critical technologies. France is moving to ban public officials from using American platforms including Google Meet, Zoom, and Teams, a government spokesperson told Politico. Officials will soon make the switch to Visio, a video conferencing tool that runs on infrastructure provided by French firm Outscale. In the European Parliament, lawmakers are urging its president, Roberta Metsola, to ditch US software and hardware, as well as a US-based travel booking tool. In Germany, politicians want a potential German or European substitute for software made by US data analyst firm Palantir. Such dependencies on key technologies are naturally a major problem, Sebastian Fiedler, SPD, so socialist, lawmaker, and expert on policing, told Politico. Even in the Netherlands, among Europe's more pro-American countries, there are growing calls from lawmakers and voters to ring-fence sensitive technologies from US influence. Dutch lawmakers are reviewing a petition signed by 140,000 people calling on the state to block the acquisition of a state identity verification tool by a US company. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, in late January, German entrepreneur Anna Zeiter announced the launch of a Europe-based social media platform called W that could rival Elon Musk X, which has faced fine for breaching the EU's content moderation rules. W plans to plans to host its data on European servers owned by European companies and limits its investors to Europeans, Zeiter told Euronews. So far, Brussels has yet to codify any such moves into law. But upcoming legislation on cloud and AI services are expected to send signals about the need to Europeanize the bloc's tech offering. And again, it's one thing to create like a new social media platform, like it's one thing to create W. It's another to having people be ready to switch to that. Are people ready to ditch Facebook, Instagram, and go on a brand new platform? That remains to be seen. If you tell people, okay, you have to drop YouTube and you only are now on Dailymotion, are people going to do the switch? On energy, the same trend is apparent. The United States provides more than a quarter of the US gas, a share set to rise further as a full ban on Russian imports takes effect. But EU officials warn about the risk of increasing Europe's dependency on the US in yet another area. Trump's claims on Greenland were a clear wake-up call for the EU, showing that energy can no longer be seen in isolation from geopolitical trends, EU Energy Commissioner Dan Jorgensen said last Wednesday. I agree, but it's still better to have a European option. Sure, you can have the option. I mean, I'm sure the European options exist. Again, how you do the switch? I mean, Blue Sky, what's the... I mean, okay, I'll take another example. When Musk took over Twitter, when Musk took over Twitter, you had the whole thing, oh yeah, we need to leave Twitter, we need to go to Blue Sky, we need to go to Mastodon. Mastodon was actually, Mastodon is European. It was even financed by European money. we're what, a year, 2 years after that? Mastodon was barely, I mean, people are not switching to Mastodon. I mean, I created an account on Mastodon, I dropped it. I ended up dropping it because I found it like much more complicated to use, much less user friendly. You don't have the algorithm and everything. Like, and so yeah, people don't use it because you don't have the feature that you like on the American platforms. They're supposed to run on Atmosphere, the Blue Sky. But I think they're using an open source version of an American company, but it's an open source, so they can modify it. And then the servers will be Europeans, like by European company. Okay, I read that. The Greenland crisis reinforced concerns that the blocs risk replacing one dependency with another, said Jorgensen, adding that as a result, Brussels is stepping up efforts to diversify, deepening talks with alternative suppliers, including Canada, Qatar, and North African countries such as Algeria. Payment systems are also drawing scrutiny, with lawmakers warning about over-reliance on US payment systems such as MasterCard and Visa. The digital euro, a digital version of cash that the European Central Bank is preparing to issue in 2029, aims to cut these dependencies and provide a pan-European sovereign means of payment. With the digital euro, Europeans will remain in control of their money, their choices, and their future, ECB President Christine Lagarde said last year. In Germany, some politicians are sounding the alarms about the 1,200 tons of gold reserve that Germany keeps in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. In a time of growing global uncertainty and under President Trump's unpredictable US policy, it's no longer acceptable to have that much in gold reserves in the US, Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, the German politician from the Liberal Free Democratic Party, who chairs the Parliament's Defense Committee, told Der Spiegel. Several European countries are pushing the EU to privilege European manufacturers when it comes to spending EU public money via a Buy European clause. That's another thing that is getting pushed. The idea that in some areas you should buy in priority from European providers. And there's like a proposal in that sense that are being prepared by the Commission that should be published soon-ish to do that. There was I think last week or this week, there was an opinion piece of Séjourné co-signed by like a bit less than 1,500 CEOs asking for a Buy European system. Like the same reasoning, yes. The same reasoning. Currently, so you have this Buy European clause in or European preference rather in defense, so in EDIP and SAFE, and the Ukrainian, most likely the Ukrainian loan, and the Commission is planning to do it, is thinking about doing it for public procurement or part of public procurement, so the contracts that state issues, and as part of the in some critical sectors, as part of the new industrial policy, the Industrial Accelerator Act, I think the official name is, where you would identify like key industry in which there you would encourage a European preference, basically, which is the thing that Séjourné, so the French commissioner, is pushing. But there are debates among member states on how far you should go on this idea of Buy European clauses, etc. So the principle is accepted. How far you go with it, and what do you put under the Made in Europe appellation, up to debate currently. Okay. Until a few years ago, countries like Poland, the Netherlands, or the Baltic states would never have agreed to such buy European clauses, but even those countries are now backing calls to prioritize purchases from EU-based companies. How long is the article? Okay, literally the final paragraph. Okay. That's literally what we're talking about. So, 150 billion EU program, so SAFE, to help countries boost their defense investment, finalized in May of last year, states that no more than 35% of the components in any given purchase by cost should originate from outside the EU and partner states like Norway and Ukraine. The US is not considered a partner country under the scheme. For now, European countries rely heavily on the US for military enablers, including surveillance and reconnaissance, intelligence, strategic lift, missile defense, and space-based assets. But the powerful conservative umbrella group, the EPP, says that these are precisely the areas where Europe needs to ramp up its own capacity. When EU leaders from the EPP agreed on their 2026 roadmap in Zagreb, they stated that the Buy European principle should apply to an upcoming Commission proposal on joint procurement. The title of the EPP's roadmap, Time for Independence. But again, like, even if you have the principle is accepted, how fast you deploy it, how much money you put on the money to deploy it, that's where the difficult discussion is. And that's where you have like to oversimplify. You have on the one hand France that wants to go very far, very fast, and other like Germany, Poland, Italy, that arguably more exposed than France on the number to the US than on certain things, are why they will be on the principle, say, okay, we need to also chill a bit, take our time because we can't snap our fingers, etc. But like, be sure that that's going to be like the new trend for the coming years is how do we become more independent and reduce our dependencies, including on the US. Any questions on that or on other things, since it was my final article for today? Let me go back full screen. Otherwise, I will do the conclusion. When you said that Europe is understanding that the USA is no longer a reliable ally for at least the next generation, by generation, do you mean something closer to 10 or 70 years? Our generation technically is 25 years, 20 to 25 years. And how much could that understanding be influenced by fair elections and a US administration more friendly to Europe? I understand the damage to US reputation is permanent on some level regardless. I mean, Europe is making its peace with the fact that Trump is not an anomaly. Like this brand, this populism, this brand of return to US imperialism is there to stay. Even if Trump goes, Vance will push the same policy, etc., etc. The Republicans are a lost cause, and I think that they also learned their lesson from Biden in the sense that another Democrat leader might come, but then once he goes, then you have the Republicans that are back and you're back at square one. So I think there is, okay, we learned our lesson. The point is, okay, the time where there was a political consensus in the US, whether Republican or Democrats, that the US had to have a strong relationship with the EU, with Europe, ensure its security, etc., etc. That's gone. Like, you have, maybe the Democrats are still convinced of that. Republicans, they're done. So you don't want to play Russian roulette at every election. So you have to start the shift to say, okay, to protect ourselves from this Trump and future Trump, we have to make the move to become more independent. Because most likely, you will not have again a political consensus in the US for the next 20 years because of what Trump did within the Republicans. But yeah, there's also the more generally, since we're also in a world that is much more where the rule-based order is going down. Going down maybe a strong word, but at least heavily threatened. Much more policy based on force. There's this idea, okay, we are increasingly on our own, and so we need to prepare ourselves. And the thing is, it takes a long time. Like that's the whole thing. The whole problem for Europe is that, okay, we need to do a transition on a number of things. In the best of circumstances, if you want to manage this properly, that's a transition that would take 10, 15, 20 years. Europe does not have 10, 15, 20 years. It can't do, because you have Russia, and we know that Russia is looking at getting ready to potentially do something from the 2030s, so you don't have 10, 15 years to become more independent in terms of defense. At the same time, you can't do it in 6 months. That's impossible. And you can't push too fast either, because as long as Trump is in power, if he has the feeling that Europe is getting away, he might retaliate and remove prematurely the protection from the US. So you have a very complicated balance on, okay, we have to move fast, but not too fast enough, otherwise we lose everything. And at the same time, we have a clear deadline for 2030. So it's an extremely complicated balance that the EU has to make. And also, you need the money to put on the table, and you need a political consensus even in Europe. It's one thing to say, okay, we want to become independent. You have to build a political consensus, including among the public opinions, about them accepting everything that entails not relying on the US anymore. Like the example I use typically, French very much on board to become more independent from the US, not really that Europe should no longer rely on American defense, etc., etc. The second you tell the French public opinion, well, does that mean that France would be ready to die for Danzig? Suddenly, opinions are a bit more split, which then affects the credibility of the entire thing, etc., etc. So you don't only have to invest into material capabilities, you also need to build the political acceptability of the consequences of the thing that you want to do. Because otherwise, yeah, if you build a nice shiny army, but then but no, I don't want to go defend the others because I don't want to die for another country. Your nice shiny army does nothing for European defense then. So yeah, wait and see. All right. Last chance to ask a question. In the meantime, I do the program for the week. Next time I see you, Friday in French at 5. Not for a news review. We're doing a political FAQ. So, as usual, it will be like as usual. I don't do that usually. So, it will be really as discussion. You ask me any question you have about Europe, and we talked about to answer your questions. Like, it's not necessarily going to be reading the news as we do usually. So that's gonna be on Friday. As usual, I will send the link to my Not Gonna Lie for those of you who can't be there on stream and so they want to send questions. I have my Not Gonna Lie. You can send in advance your questions and I will treat them during the stream. And then next week for the usual program, Tuesday evening for the news review as usual. Okay, you have your debates on Asan and everything. All right. Do I forget anything? I don't think I do. Yes, see. Put the links to my stuff. There you go. If you want to follow on the social medias and everything. We say goodbye to Twitter. We say goodbye to everyone. And on this note, I wish you all a good evening. And I will see you either on Friday or next week for new adventures. Bye everyone. Have a good